The year was drawing to its coldest nights when word spread like wildfire across the valleys. The kingdom of Almaris and the kingdom of Draegorn were marching to war. The air itself seemed heavier in the villages lying between the two realms, as though the land already knew it would drink blood before the season turned. Villagers, humble folk who tilled their fields and prayed for long harvests, looked to the horizon with dread. They saw dust clouds rising where armies gathered, and they whispered to one another in the taverns. Draegorn's king has summoned all his knights. Almaris swore no man would leave the battlefield alive. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Men sharpened tools that would never be enough against steel, and old storytellers muttered of omens. Crows circling in dark flocks, wolves howling long into the night. Rumor fed rumor until the villagers' fear became a living thing. And still the armies marched closer. On the wide plain of Greymarch, two vast camps faced one another, separated by only a stretch of barren earth. By day, the banners of each kingdom fluttered high. Almaris with its silver lion on a field of crimson, Draegorn with its black eagle spread wide across golden silk. The soldiers of Almaris polished their mail shirts, tightened the leather straps on their helmets, and whetted their blades until sparks flew in the dark. The men of Draegorn, clad in darker iron, tested the weight of their axes and raised their shields painted in sunburst patterns. War drums thundered through the night, each side trying to outmatch the other in noise and spirit. Horses snorted and pawed the earth, their armor clinking like chains of doom. Commanders walked the lines, voices steady, eyes grim. Men who knew that at dawn, the plain would be awash with screams. Yet in the shadows of the campfires, whispers spread. The Almarian king has sworn to fight in the vanguard. Others muttered, "Nay, Draegorn's champion, the Iron Duke, will not fall to any blade forged by mortal hands." The men listened, their knuckles white on sword hilts, their faith balanced on the edge of a rumor. Night fell heavy upon Greymarch, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The two camps glowed like twin constellations, fires flickering against the darkness. But beyond their circles of light stretched silence and dread. No laughter rose from the soldiers of either side, only the sound of sharpening steel, the low rumble of distant drums, and the quiet prayers of men who knew they might not see another dawn. In the camp of Almaris, knights stood with pages at their sides, adjusting chainmail and fitting polished greaves. They wore surcoats of deep crimson, stitched with the silver lion of their kingdom. Pikes were lined in neat rows, their spearheads catching the firelight like hundreds of fiery stars. The longbows, strung and waxed, rested against the tent poles, ready to rain death across the plain. On the other side, Draegorn soldiers prepared in a different fashion. They oiled their blackened armor, scarred from many campaigns. Their axes were broad, meant not only to cleave shields but to shatter the men behind them. Their helmets were horned, their banners a sea of golden eagles stretching as far as the eye could see. Rumor spread quickly among their ranks that the Iron Duke himself had sworn an oath before the gods that no enemy commander would leave Greymarch alive. Meanwhile, the villagers who had fled to the hills watched from afar. Mothers pressed their children's faces into their skirts, trying to shield them from the sight of the two armies. Farmers whispered that the plain itself, once fertile, would never grow crops again after so much blood was spilled. The wind carried strange sounds, horses restless in their lines, men whispering oaths to lovers and families far away, priests chanting blessings over trembling squires. Some claimed to hear more than that, the faint clash of phantom swords in the dark, as though the spirits of the fallen were already rehearsing tomorrow's slaughter. And above it all, the sky loomed vast and cloudless, filled with stars. A pale moon hung like a blade over the plain, silver and cold, as though it were the gods themselves who would watch the fields of men burn come dawn. The sun rose blood-red over Greymarch, spilling light across the plain like the first stroke of a sword. Dew clung to the grass, soon to be trampled beneath 1,000 boots. From both camps came the creak of leather, the groan of shields lifted into place, and the thunder of hooves as knights mounted their steeds. Almaris stirred first. The great horns of the silver lion roared, long and deep, echoing through the valley. their banners unfurled in the dawn wind, crimson cloth alive with silver lions that gleamed in the rising sun. The commanders rode down the lines, their voices raised, "For Almaris, for king and kin." Men slammed spear butts against the earth, the ground shaking beneath their unity. Across the field, Draegorn answered. Drums like the beating of 1,000 war hearts filled the air, slow and terrible. Their banners rippled, golden eagles against a sea of black. Soldiers slammed axes against their shields in a rhythm that shook even the bravest. And then he came, the Iron Duke, clad in armor the color of midnight, his helm crowned with gilded wings. He raised his sword skyward, and the roar that followed seemed to tear the very morning in half. Between the two armies stretched silence for a moment, the stillness of a world balanced on a blade. Villagers from the hills watched in terror as the air seemed to vibrate, heavy with the weight of what was to come. Some prayed for Almaris, others for Draegorn, but most simply prayed that the gods would end the madness quickly. Then, with a single cry carried over the wind, the lines began to move. Shields locked, spears leveled, horsemen lowered lances. The earth trembled beneath the march of men, and the day of reckoning began. The armies of Almaris and Draegorn collided like two storms meeting in the heart of the world. The ground shook beneath the charge, dust rising in clouds as spears lowered and swords gleamed in the morning light. The first crash came from the knights. Almaris' cavalry, crimson banners streaming, thundered forward with lances poised. They struck Draegorn's front line like a hammer. Lances shattered against shields, horses reared and screamed, and men were hurled into the dirt. Yet Draegorn did not break. Their shield wall held firm, iron on iron, as axes swung up to cut down riders from their saddles. Then came the infantry, a tide of steel and flesh. The air filled with the ring of blades striking blades, with the dull thud of axes biting into armor, with the crack of bones beneath maces. Arrows whistled overhead, loosed from Almaris's longbowmen in endless volleys, darkening the sky before falling into Draegorn's ranks. Still, Draegorn's men pressed forward, roaring their chants, hacking through pike shafts with brutal swings. The noise was unbearable. A storm of metal, a sea of screams, war drums pounding to drown out the cries of the dying. Blood slicked the grass, and already the plain of Greymarch looked less like earth and more like some cursed field of crimson mud. Among the chaos, banners dipped and rose again, men fighting to defend the symbols of their kingdoms. The silver lion of Almaris staggered once as its bearer fell beneath an axe, only to be seized by another knight who raised it high again. The golden eagle of Draegorn swayed but never fell, held firm by warriors who would rather die than see it touch the ground. This was no skirmish. This was no mere raid. It was the fury of nations unleashed, and neither side showed signs of yielding. The battle raged with a fury that no bard could truly capture. For hours the two kingdoms ground against one another, a storm of iron and fire. Yet at last cracks began to show. On the left flank of Almaris, the shield wall faltered. Draegorn's axemen, men as broad as oxen, swung with such savage strength that shields splintered and spears snapped like kindling. The Almarian infantry gave ground, step by bloody step, and panic threatened to spread like a spark on dry straw. It was then that Sir Kalen, commander of the Lion Guard, charged into the fray. His armor gleamed red with blood, his great sword a blur of steel. He rallied his men with a single roar. "Stand, lions! Stand or die!" With him at their head, the line stiffened. His blade carved through Draegorn's warriors, each strike buying precious breaths for his comrades. Tales would later say he slew 20 in that hour, though none counted for certain. Elsewhere, Draegorn too found its moment of fire. The Iron Duke himself thundered forward with his chosen riders, smashing into Almaris's cavalry on the right flank. His sword rose and fell with merciless rhythm, each blow breaking shields and cleaving men from saddle to soil. Those who saw him swore he was no mortal man but a spirit of war, his black armor gleaming like the wings of a raven in the sun. Wherever he rode, the golden eagle rose higher, and men followed him as though he were the god's own hand. Yet not all was glory. Among the chaos, betrayal brewed. A captain of Almaris, whose debts to Draegorn's gold had long chained his loyalty, gave false orders to his men, pulling them back when they were needed most. His retreat left a gap, a wound in Almaris's formation that Draegorn's soldiers poured into with savage glee. The plain of Greymarch was no longer lines of soldiers but a churning sea of chaos. Men fought not in neat ranks but in desperate knots, each struggling to keep breath in his lungs and blood in his veins. Still the banners waved, still the drums pounded, and still the war roared on. The sky darkened though the sun still stood high. It was not clouds that shadowed Greymarch but the endless flight of arrows. From the ridges, Almaris's longbowmen loosed volley after volley, their bowstrings singing like a swarm of angry bees. The air hissed, then rained death, iron-tipped shafts falling in sheets upon Draegorn's ranks. Men raised shields too late. Some crumpled in silence, arrows sprouting from their throats. Horses screamed and collapsed, crushing riders beneath them. Yet still Draegorn advanced, stepping over their dead as though the very ground had risen against them. In answer, Draegorn's own crossbowmen fired. Bolts heavy and cruel punched through mail, snapped ribs, and sent men tumbling backward into the mud. The plain became a storm of flying death, arrows and bolts hissing past one another, filling the sky with a black rain. On the hills, the villagers who had not fled watched in horror. Mothers covered their children's eyes, but the cries carried up to them regardless. The clash of steel, the screams of the dying, the drums and horns, all blended into a sound so monstrous that some swore it was not war at all but the voice of hell itself. Despair seeped into the ranks of Almaris as their dead piled high. The gap left by the traitor captain widened, and Draegorn poured through like water through a broken dam. The silver lion banner staggered again, nearly lost beneath the tide. Panic took root in men's hearts. Yet there were still those who stood unbroken. Sir Kalen roared above the din, dragging men back into line with his presence alone. Priests of Almaris strode among the wounded, holding aloft iron crosses and crying prayers that mingled with the screams. And on Draegorn's side, the Iron Duke raised his blade to the sun, his voice carrying above the madness. Forward! Break them! Today we forge Draegorn's destiny. The earth shook as both armies pressed harder, neither yielding, neither forgiving. The plain of Greymarch was no longer green. It was black with smoke, red with blood, and white with the steel of clashing armies. The battle no longer resembled an ordered war. It was a storm of duels, 1,000 small battles raging within the great one. Lines shattered into knots of men who hacked, stabbed, and clawed at each other as if possessed by madness. On Almaris's right, a knight named Ser Roderick fought like a man born of legend. Surrounded by Draegorn's soldiers, he wielded twin axes, spinning and cleaving with such ferocity that even the boldest shrank back. With every fallen foe, his voice rang, "For the lion!" Men rallied to him, pressing forward, their spirits reignited by his defiance. Across the field, a champion of Draegorn rose in answer, a hulking brute known only as Gorth the Bear. He swung a hammer so massive it shattered shields in single blows, driving men into the dirt like broken dolls. Roderick and Gorth clashed at last, steel screaming against iron, sparks flying as each man's fury found its equal. Soldiers on both sides paused, watching as the two titans carved their legend into the plain. Elsewhere, Sir Kalen fought at the center. His greatsword was no longer polished silver but crimson, heavy with gore. He cut his way through Draegorn's elite guard, his armor battered, his arm weary, yet his spirit unbroken. Men whispered even as they bled, "The Lion Guard does not yield." But not all heroes fought with honor. In the chaos, betrayal struck again. The traitor captain of Almaris, seeing his own side falter, turned cloak entirely. He and his men raised Draegorn's eagle above their spears, cutting down their former brothers from behind. Panic tore through the Almarian ranks nearest them, and cries of "treachery, treachery," spread faster than fire on straw. The drums of Draegorn thundered louder, drowning even the screams, while horns of Almaris blared in desperate reply. Smoke choked the plain as fires spread from burning siege towers. The sun was now hidden by haze, turning the world into a dim red twilight, though the day was not yet half spent. It seemed to the villagers watching that the gods themselves had abandoned Greymarch, leaving only steel and death to decide its fate. By midday, both armies were frayed to the breaking point. The plain of Greymarch was littered with the fallen, men, horses, and shattered banners alike. Smoke rose in thick pillars, mingling with the metallic scent of blood and iron. Yet neither kingdom yielded. Almaris's lines began to falter more visibly. The traitor captain's betrayal had carved a wound that Draegorn exploited mercilessly. Spears and axes tore through the gaps, dragging knights down into the mud. Many screamed in fear, some threw down their weapons, and others fled, only to meet Draegorn's relentless pursuit. But even amid despair, sparks of courage burned. Ser Roderick, battered and bloodied, rallied a small company of Almarian survivors. He seized a broken catapult frame and thrust it into Draegorn's flank, swinging his axes with desperation and genius. His sudden strike bought precious moments for retreating soldiers to regroup. "Hold the line. For every lion that falls, 1,000 eagles will taste steel," he bellowed. On Draegorn's side, the Iron Duke rode among his men like a shadow of doom. His presence struck terror even into those who followed him. Yet he, too, faced moments that tested his strength. A young Almarian knight, barely out of boyhood, lunged at him with a spear, shattering its tip against the Duke's armor. The boy fell under the blow, but the Duke's expression softened for a fleeting moment, a reminder that even monsters are touched by mortality. The battle teetered on a knife's edge. For every Draegorn soldier that fell to the desperate courage of Almaris, another gap opened elsewhere. For every Almarian hero, 1,000 ordinary soldiers were cut down like wheat. Greymarch had become a crucible, and only fate or sheer will would decide who would emerge alive. In the villages, those who had not fled wept at the edges of the fields. Smoke carried screams across the hills, and children trembled in their mothers' arms. There was no glory to see, only death and the terrifying power of armies clashing in a world where ordinary lives meant nothing. As the sun reached its zenith, a shift rippled across Greymarch. Draegorn, once locked in endless struggle with Almaris, began to seize the advantage. The Iron Duke's relentless charges had fractured the Almarian right flank completely, sending terrified soldiers scattering into the mud. Arrows and bolts rained down on their backs as they fled, the roar of Draegorn's warriors driving them forward. Yet even in the face of looming defeat, Almaris refused to die quietly. Sir Calin and Ser Roderick held the center, forming a bulwark of bloodied men who would not yield. Every inch of ground they reclaimed came at a terrible cost. Men fell around them like autumn leaves, but their banners never touched the ground. The silver lion fluttered defiantly in the smoke, a symbol of hope in a sea of despair. The Iron Duke, sensing the collapse of his enemy, pressed harder. He cut through Almaris's cavalry with terrifying precision, his golden eagle rising higher as each opposing knight fell. His voice carried across the battlefield. "Today, Almaris falls. Today, Draegorn reigns." Still chaos reigned. Fires from burning siege towers spread, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky. Cavalry clashed with infantry, arrows darkened the sun, and the ground was churned into a morass of blood and mud. Heroism and death walked hand in hand. Young squires flung themselves into the fray, knowing they would never see home again, while veteran warriors fought with the strength of men possessed by duty and vengeance. And yet, in that moment, a single gap opened in Draegorn's lines, small, almost imperceptible. It was enough for Ser Calin and his remaining knights to strike. They crashed into the exposed flank, axes and swords gleaming, sending Draegorn soldiers tumbling into the chaos. For a heartbeat, the tide seemed uncertain, the future of Greymarch hanging by a thread. Amid the chaos of Greymarch, the war's outcome now hinged on the deeds of a few. In the center, Sir Calin faced the Iron Duke himself. Their eyes met across the smoke and blood, a storm of hatred and resolve flashing between them. The clash was cataclysmic. Kaelin's great sword met the Duke's blade with a ringing scream that echoed across the battlefield. Sparks flew, and the earth beneath them trembled. Each strike threatened to fell both men, yet neither yielded. Around them, soldiers paused mid-fight, drawn to the duel of legends unfolding in their midst. Elsewhere, Ser Roderick cut a path through Draegorn's forces. His twin axes spun in deadly arcs, felling men twice his size. Yet he was alone, and exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders. Still, he fought on, inspired by the cries of his fellow knights and the gleam of the silver lion over the center line. Even in the midst of glory, betrayal and despair continued to gnaw. Draegorn's soldiers discovered pockets of Almarian survivors hiding in the mud, striking without mercy. Some men of Almaris, seeing comrades fall all around them, abandoned hope, only to be cut down by Draegorn's relentless advance. And yet, in this maelstrom of violence, small acts of heroism shone like stars. A young squire, barely more than a boy, dragged a wounded captain from the mud and placed him behind the lines, risking death with every step. An archer, trapped on a hill, loosed a volley into Draegorn's flanking warriors, buying time for Almaris to stabilize a critical point in their line. The battlefield had become a crucible where valor, betrayal, despair, and hope intertwined. Every swing, every parry, every fallen soldier mattered. The duel of Kaelin and the Iron Duke was more than personal. It symbolized the fate of two kingdoms. By late afternoon, the sun burned down on a battlefield soaked in mud and blood. The roar of warriors, the clash of steel, and the thunder of hooves had not ceased for hours. It was here, in the center of the chaos, that destiny chose its moment. Sir Kaelin and the Iron Duke circled each other, their blades clashing again and again with a force that made men stagger and horses rear. Sparks flew like lightning, and with each strike, the very air seemed to shiver. Finally, Kaelin found an opening, a split in the Duke's guard, and drove his great sword deep. The Iron Duke fell, his golden eagle banner toppling with him. A cheer rose from Almaris, shaking the battered soldiers with renewed hope. Yet victory was not immediate. Draegorn's forces roared in retaliation, pressing forward with axes and maces, trying to avenge their fallen leader. For every victory, there was a cost. Knights of Almaris lay sprawled in the mud, shields shattered, blood staining their surcoats. Heroes of Draegorn, too, fell in heaps, their golden eagles fluttering in defeat. It was then that Ser Roderick struck the final blow to Draegorn's flanking force, using their momentum against them. With coordinated courage and the Iron Duke's death demoralizing their troops, Draegorn's army began to falter. Soldiers who had once roared now stumbled and fled, tripping over the bodies of their comrades. Smoke and fire painted the plain in strokes of red and black, and the ground itself seemed to sigh beneath the weight of death. In those final moments, heroism and despair mingled. Almaris soldiers raised their banners higher, though many had lost friends, brothers, and fathers. Draegorn's survivors fled into the hills, leaving their dead behind. Greymarch fell silent, save for the moans of the wounded and the occasional cry of a soldier searching for a lost comrade. The plain was quiet now, save for the groans of the wounded and the whisper of the wind through the broken banners. Smoke curled from smoldering siege towers, and the earth was churned to a muddy wasteland, scarred with blood and bodies. The air smelled of iron, ash, and death. Almaris had won, but the victory was bitter. Thousands of men lay dead, their armor dented and bloodied. Knights who had survived walked like shadows, dragging wounded comrades and muttering prayers for those who would never rise. Sir Kaelin, exhausted and covered in gore, surveyed the battlefield with hollow eyes. The silver lion still flew, but it felt fragile in a world so soaked in loss. Draegorn had suffered even more. Survivors limped away into the hills, their golden eagle banners tattered and bloody. Many would never return to their villages, their families forever mourning sons, fathers, and brothers lost. Draegorn's king would live, but his power was fractured, his army broken, and his name forever marked by this catastrophic defeat. In the villages, those who had survived crept down from the hills. They found devastation, corpses, and the wreckage of homes caught in the path of the armies. Crops were trampled, livestock slaughtered, and the land itself seemed cursed. Mothers wept over sons who would never return, children clung to widowed fathers, and priests held mass for the thousands who would never be buried properly. Even the soldiers who had survived could not celebrate. Victory came with a weight too heavy to bear. The fields of Greymarch, once fertile, were now soaked with blood, scarred with craters from siege engines, and littered with broken weapons. It was a graveyard of nations, a reminder that war spared no one. Not kings, not knights, not peasants. The war at Greymarch reshaped the fate of both kingdoms. Almaris, though victorious, paid dearly. Its armies were decimated, cities awaited the return of men who might never come, and the treasury was drained to feed survivors and repair shattered fortresses. Yet the silver lion still flew, and the people looked to their king with cautious hope, praying that such bloodshed would never return. Draegorn, humiliated and fractured, faced unrest within its own borders. Survivors returned home carrying the scars of defeat, some broken in body, others broken in spirit. The Iron Duke's fall left a vacuum of leadership that rival nobles sought to exploit, sparking tensions that would take years to settle. The Golden Eagle, once a proud symbol of dominance, now hung in tatters in villages across the kingdom, a reminder of how even the mighty could fall. For the common folk, the consequences were immediate and harsh. Fields lay ruined, and famine stalked those who had survived the army's march. Families mourned in silence, haunted by the screams of men cut down on Greymarch's plain. Tales of the heroism and betrayals from the battle were whispered for years around hearths, serving as both warning and legend. And yet, amid grief, life endured. Villagers rebuilt what they could, soldiers returned to their homes, and the kingdoms began the slow, painful process of recovery. The names of heroes like Sir Caelan and Ser Roderick were carved into memory, while the treacherous captain's name was spat with curses in every corner of Almaris. The shadow of Greymarch would stretch for decades, a constant reminder that the cost of pride in war is measured not only in crowns and banners, but in the lives of those who must bear its weight. Years passed, but the name Greymarch lingered like a scar across the lands. Bards sang of the plain where steel had rained like fire, where men had fought with valor and died in agony. Children learned of Sir Caelan and Ser Roderick, heroes whose courage had turned the tide, and of the Iron Duke, whose might and fall had defined an era. In Almaris, the silver lion became more than a symbol. It was a reminder that even victory demanded sacrifice. Knights trained harder, peasants honored the fallen with shrines, and the king rebuilt his army, mindful of the price of hubris and the weight of loyalty. The traitor captain's name lived only in whispers and curses, a warning that treachery could undo even the bravest hearts. Draegorn struggled to recover. Its golden eagle, once a banner of triumph, became a cautionary tale. The kingdom healed slowly, its people hardened by loss. Stories of the battle passed from generation to generation, teaching fear, respect, and the cost of war. Some said the ghost of the Iron Duke still wandered the hills, sword in hand, watching over the plains where he had fallen. Greymarch itself remained sacred and feared. The plain bore the memory of thousands of deaths. Blood-stained earth, shattered weapons, and scorched banners. Yet in its ruin, it also bore witness to heroism, loyalty, and the courage of ordinary men and women caught in the tides of history. And so the tale of Greymarch endured, etched into stone and song, a story of kingdoms, warriors, and villagers alike. A story of how a single day of steel, blood, and fire could change the fate of nations forever.